you use EFT to help change your relationship with food and your body so you can enjoy true food and body freedom, even if you've struggled with failed diets, emotional eating, and poor self-image for years? Yes, you can. Details straight ahead. Stephen Carter here, and I am your host for the EFT Tapping Junction podcast and the Energy Healing for Well-Being podcast. This show is for you if you're using emotional freedom techniques or you use other tapping methods such as thought field therapy, trauma tapping technique, positive EFT, or other meridian tapping methods for your own self-care. This show is also for you if you're a therapist or coach helping others. You can learn more about my background, certifications, and the like on our website at EFT-MD.com, EFT-MD.com. You can listen to previous episodes and subscribe or follow EFT Tapping Junction at that same website address, EFT-MD.com. You can also subscribe to the EFT Tapping Junction show and the Energy Healing for Well-Being show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. When you subscribe or follow, you will never miss an episode. If you have questions about this or any other episode, or you would like to share a comment or reach me for any reason, email me at cartermethod@gmail.com, cartermethod@gmail.com. In this episode, you're going to meet Joan Ridsdel, a registered social worker and life coach. Joan helps women find food freedom and body confidence so they can put diets and emotional eating behind them. Joan shares how she overcame her own struggles with weight, binging, and emotional eating, and she'll share how she did that using simple methods to include emotional freedom techniques, and she'll share how you can do the same. Joan is the founder and creator of W.I.S.E.R Woman Coaching and Personal Development. She couples therapeutic coaching and energy healing, EFT, NLP, short for neuro-linguistic programming, choice theory, meditation, mindfulness, self-compassion, and other modalities. She combines those with years of experience coaching and counseling women. You'll want to stay tuned through my entire conversation with Joan to discover how you can receive a free resource guide that will help you move beyond the roller coaster diets and feel good about yourself. This is the audio portion of a video conversation I had with Joan. If you would like to watch the video version, I'll have the YouTube link in the show notes. I'll also have Joan's contact information there as well, because the information you're going to hear in this episode is relevant for listeners of both EFT Tapping Junction and the Energy Healing for Well-Being podcasts. I'm sharing the content in both shows. Joan can be reached through her website at joanridsdel.com, and that's JOANRIDSDEL, joanridsdel.com. With no further delay, let's join my conversation with registered social worker and life coach Joan Ridsdel. Welcome, Joan, to the Creating Inner Harmony program. Joan, it's an absolute delight to have you here. I know you're passionate about helping people who struggle with emotional and binge eating, and I know you're helping clients using emotional freedom techniques, neuro-linguistic programming, and other holistic methods. And I definitely want to learn more about how you're applying those methods And in addition, I know you've written a brilliant, brilliant guide you're offering to viewers and podcast listeners for the asking. And we're going to talk about that wonderful guide shortly. Before we dive into the mechanics or how you're helping clients, I'd like to explore why this work is so important to you. What led to you changing the work you were doing as a registered social worker to your work now as a professional life coach, specializing in what you so beautifully describe as food freedom and body confidence?
Oh, Steve, thank you so much for that introduction and for having me. I've been looking forward to our chat today, our conversation. And yes, the issues around food and body, emotional eating and binge eating are a passion of mine. Not surprisingly, because I have had to work through my own body and food issues. But let me start a little bit further back in my history. I became aware of coaching in my 20s when I was just starting my social work practice. And I didn't have the space at the time. I was just getting started as a social worker and having children and all of that. And in those days, I believe there was only one coaches training school, which CTI, I believe, was the only one. And so coaching was just sort of getting started. So I filed that information in the back of my mind and sort of fast forwarded. I created my social work practice, worked in a number of positions in social work throughout the years. And then in my early 50s, I sort of thought, gee, retirement is coming and I would like to be able to do some coaching, step away from counseling because I've been doing that for a long time. And so I decided that I would step into doing some coaching. And coaching had been part of my practice anyway, but I decided that I wanted to formalize it. And so I took some training through Erickson International Coaching, which, by the way, embeds NLP into their training. And I'd already been trained as an NLP practitioner, so that really fit well. What happened was that I started my Erickson training in 2015, in July of 2015. And in September of 2015, my brother was kidnapped by terrorists in the Philippines, which sent us, of course, on a huge 7-month journey, huge trauma in our lives. I grappled with, should I stop the coaches training while we're going through this? And I decided that I would keep going because one of the things that it did was it grounded me. And it was the one thing I could sort of look forward to throughout this horrible event that we went through. My brother was subsequently murdered in 2016 in April. I continued to do my coaches training and finished it in 2016. But I also, because of the trauma that we went through, I went through some trauma counseling, trauma therapy. I did some amazing work with this counselor. She used EFT as well as EMDR. And I actually felt that EFT was a better fit for what I was needing during that time. And so that sort of introduced me again to EFT. And again, I sort of filed that information while I was going through it. But what happened through the trauma counseling was that I realized, she said to me, it's really important, and I'm so glad that you're here because it's really important that you never waste a trauma. And, you never waste a good trauma. And out of that trauma and the work that I did, I reevaluated my life. I looked at where I'd come from, who I was now, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. One of the things that came out was that I realized that I had been dieting since I was 10. And even prior to that, food had been an issue for me, probably since I was about 2. And I used food just, to soothe my, I didn't know at the time it was anxiety, but to soothe my anxiety and my stress. And of course, food works in the moment. It does. It calms your nervous system and your body until then you realize that you've eaten too much or you've binged or you've eaten in a way that you don't want to. And then, of course, you're more anxious and stressed and feel terrible about yourself. So that was the cycle that I started very early on in life and then started my first diet when I was 10. So out of this trauma, I realized that I'd been doing that for a very long time, for decades, and that I no longer wanted to do that. when I thought about my future and I thought about what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be and how I wanted to live, I looked at, life's too short and it can change on a dime. And do I really want to spend the rest of my life counting points or calories or worrying about if I'd had one extra piece of bread during the day or an extra cookie? And I decided that no, I didn't. The other thing I realized was that I'd only lost weight, got to a goal weight twice in my life. Once when I was in my late teens, and it was then that I was at the height of binging and purging as well. I'm sure if I had sought help that I would have had an eating disorder diagnosis, but I didn't tell anybody. And that's part of the whole issue around food and body issues, that we often don't talk about them because there's a lot of shame and a lot of anxiety and stress around them. I didn't purge for very long. I was grateful that something in me said, don't keep doing this. And so I stopped, but I continued to binge and I continued to eat emotionally for the rest of the years up until my 50s. The point I was trying to make there was that even though I got down to a goal weight by restricting my diet and being on a diet, I couldn't maintain that weight. And so I thought, I'm a bit of a slow learner, I think, in some ways, as many of us are when we're in the midst of eating and binging and all of those things. I decided that I was going to stop all of that. So I stopped dieting and started to look at my relationship with myself, with food, with my body. Decided that I also created my own coaching business, W.I.S.E.R Woman. W.I.S.E.R is an acronym for wisdom, intuition, self-compassion, energy, and resilience. And those were all of the resources that I needed to get through my brother's kidnapping and afterwards. And so it's sort of out of that trauma as well came the acronym W.I.S.E.R Woman. And so my mission really is to help women who are exhausted from going around and around that diet roller coaster, only to end up gaining and losing the same weight, which is what I did, over and over again. So my goal is to help them create a peaceful relationship with food and their bodies. I don't talk about weight that much. I don't help women lose or gain weight. Instead, what I do is I help them heal what's underneath the drive to eat, the drive to turn to food, as a way to soothe and manage their emotions, etc. And I was grateful to have come across EFT, as I said, during my trauma counseling, and decided that I would train as an EFT practitioner, which is what I did. I use EFT almost always in my coaching practice with clients for almost everything. I often combine it with NLP, and I also teach choice theory, reality therapy choice theory, which is a very cognitive model and talks about thinking and actions where those are the areas that you have control in. Your feelings and your physiology are your signals. And so I work through that process with my clients and then use EFT when we start to recognize what are the feelings that you're feeling. What's happening in your body? What are your thoughts? What are your beliefs? And what are you doing in order to get you to where you want to be? And so we tap on all of those things. I also listened to your session on Ho'oponopono, and I use that as well occasionally, which is very powerful, and combine that with EFT. So I use it in a variety of different ways, but always at the base of it is working with women, because I work primarily with women, to help them get underneath what it is that's driving them to turn to food and harming their bodies in some way.
Diets. A while back, I walked into our local Barnes & Noble bookstore, which is a major chain in the United States, and I started counting the books on the shelves about dieting, nutrition, etc. And I stopped when I hit 500 books.
Yes.
500 books on the shelf, every one of those having a different angle, a different perspective, a different way, many in diametric opposition to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Eat protein, don't eat protein, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm hearing is Well, let me ask this. When you're doing your work with clients, does diet ever become an aspect of your counseling work when you're working with clients, or is that something that you simply stay away from?
It depends. Now, I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian, so I can't speak to somebody's diet in terms of, I can't advise them as to specifically what they need to be eating. However, what I do is I work with women to help them drop into their bodies, because most often when we're dieting, we're cut off at the neck. We're in our heads and we don't listen to our bodies. We don't know how to do that. I didn't know how to do that. I had no idea what my hunger signals felt like. I mean, I knew when I was overly stuffed because I'd eaten a whole lot, but I didn't know the nuances. I didn't know that when I'm hungry, it's more than just a rumbling in my tummy. I have other signals that let me know. And so I help women come home to their bodies by being able to drop in, recognize their hunger signals and their fullness or satisfaction signals, satiety signals. When we restrict our food, we don't often recognize those kinds of issues or the issues that can come up as a result of doing that. So we talk about, are you eating enough? Are you getting enough nutrients? And of course, we always need a balance of protein, carbs, and fats. And so how are you doing that? And if I feel that it's really important for the person to be focusing at that point on their food intake or what they're eating, then I will refer to a dietitian or a nutritionist, because I don't have that expertise. But what I do have is the expertise to help women connect with their body and their body wisdom. Our bodies are amazing, and our bodies will tell us, when we're hungry, when we're full, when we're satisfied. But when we're dieting, we tend to miss those signals, and they're no different than the signals we get when we're tired. When you're tired and you need to go to sleep, when you need to use the washroom, when you're thirsty, but we don't often know about hunger. And hunger then also is a metaphor for what else are you hungry for in your life. So I also help with cravings, do a lot of work with EFT around cravings, and then look at, what are you craving other than this particular food? What else are you craving in your life? Because it's really all about figuring out, if you took weight and food and body issues off the table, what would your life look like? What would you be filling your life with that would be even more satisfying? And so part of the work I do is helping women open up the space so that they can do the things that they've been wanting to do, but weight perhaps stops them, or their size stops them, or the fears that they have around showing themselves. I didn't wear a bathing suit for decades. I wouldn't be seen in a bathing suit for decades. And so, of course, I missed out on my kids' swim activities and going to the beach. So it was only when I started to unpack my own weight story and food story and body story that I had the courage then to go to a pool and put on a bathing suit. And it really wasn't that bad. but I didn't have the courage to do it before.
In your experience, what does it take to change those patterns of stress eating, of emotional eating, of binge eating? How would you go about helping someone identify their patterns and then, as in NLP, we would say interrupt those patterns or change those patterns? What's the process you use with your clients to help them get in touch with what is really beneath the surface for them that's contributing to the binge eating, the stress eating, emotional eating? How do you go about that?
So again, it depends on where we start, where the client is and where we start with, or where I start with that client. But some of the sort of the general principles that I start with are things like, what are your triggers? What triggers you to eat and turn to food? We talk a lot about diet culture and dieting and how that sets you up for failure. If you are restricting in your diet, then you're automatically set up for a binge or to eat emotionally. So we talk about that. We unpack diet culture and dieting together. I'll help them, as I said before, to begin to tune into their bodies, because, without understanding and being able to experience your hunger and satiety signals, it's really hard then to, what else are you going to do but diet? And so I will work with women on helping them ground themselves, get into their bodies. And I do that through grounding, some chakra work, visualization, breathing, And then, of course, EFT. When we're talking about the stress and the anxiety, I'll ask them where do they experience that in their bodies. And also, even just being able to recognize that they are stressed and that they are feeling anxious within their bodies. I didn't know I was experiencing anxiety. I didn't know that that's what it was. And so I help people identify what is it within the body and what are you experiencing? What feelings are you experiencing? Because often they don't know. We look at changing beliefs. So, what are the underlying beliefs that you have? Most often it has to do with shame and not feeling good about themselves, not feeling good enough, some of those core beliefs. And so we work at, and EFT helps bring that belief or those beliefs out when we're not sure. When there are issues in childhood, I will often combine EFT with NLP and go back on someone's timeline to look at any events that have happened as a child. And so we then do some inner child work. So beliefs, inner child work. I really think it's important for women dealing with, and men, dealing with body and food issues to become self-compassionate. And so we work on self-compassion as a way of thinking and feeling instead of beating themselves up and feeling like they're failures and they're not good enough and all of those things. I also work with them on their bodies, body image. So how can you get to a point where you either feel neutral about your body when you look in the mirror, or you recognize your body's value? So what can your body do for you? In my ebook, my guide that you're going to talk about and we're going to talk about, one of the things that I invite people to do is do some movement, some dancing, dance like no one is watching. And I know that sounds a little corny, but honestly, that was one of the things that helped me, was just to be able to begin to move my body in a way that felt good instead of going to the gym and sweating. I still go to the gym and I still sweat, but I do it in a way now that's in support of my body rather than hating my body and just wanting to burn calories. And then, as I said, looking at cravings, because cravings come up and we feel terrible about ourselves. So even if we're going through this whole process of unraveling our stories around food and our body, cravings come up for things that we don't always want to be eating and we feel we can't stop. And so EFT is great for using with cravings. Did that answer your question?
It does. It does. And we've used several acronyms. EFT, of course, is short for Emotional Freedom Techniques, NLP for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. All of these are holistic approaches that, in my experience, just work like magic. You have brought up your guide. Can you share a little bit about the ebook, the guide that you created, and how people can receive their copy?
Absolutely. So I created the ebook or the guide. So it's 3 simple steps to stop emotional and binge eating. I created it because it was one of the ways that I could support people and give them something to read and access that was, easy to use. So in the guide, I talk about, changing your thoughts around your body and food. Like I mentioned, I invite people to explore gentle movement. And dancing was one of the things that helped me, dancing in private at the beginning. I created a playlist for people in the guide so that they could have some music that would help them feel something in their body or help them move their body in a way that felt good. And so the guide is just a way to start exploring your relationship with food and your body. So that was why I created it. And it's available completely free on my website, which is joanridsdel.com. And a pop-up comes up and you put your email address in. You have access to the ebook. And you also become then a member of my Wiser Woman community. And you get newsletters and information that comes up through the community.
We had a bit of a dropout. Can you share your website URL again, please?
Yes, it's joanridsdel.com.
Okay. And would you spell that for us?
Yeah, yes. So Joan is JOAN, RID, S is in Sam, D is in dog, EL.com. Ridsdel, Joan Ridsdel.
Joan, beautifully shared the insights, your own experience, The role of trauma as it relates to binge eating is a huge issue, and beliefs and all kinds of things, and most of which are unconscious or subconscious with the
Yeah.
clients. And the work that you're doing helps unpack that, makes those beliefs conscious, perhaps those traumatic memories conscious. I can remember doing a demonstration with a group in Maryland for people who were depressed and anxious. It was a
Mhm.
support group, basically. And with EFT, of course, one of the techniques is you invite people up on stage, 3, 4, 5, depending on the size of the group, and you hand them pieces of candy. And how strong is that desire to eat that particular piece of candy? And so everybody started out with a 7, 8, 9, and we tapped through. And one by one, everybody left where they got down to 0. They not only didn't want it, it was repulsive.
Yes.
Once they get to a certain point where they recognize this is not good for me, I really don't want this, and then I'm able to easily say no. However, there was one person left on stage, and we got her down from an 8 or 9 down to a 3, and a couple of rounds through, and it just didn't move. I don't know if you've ever been in the position where you're in front of 50 or 100 people and you're thinking, okay, well, 4 out of 5 ain't bad, right? We've gotten
Yeah.
success for most of the folks, but it just wasn't moving. So, as so often happens, the question came to me, ask her, is there someone who you used to eat candy with on a regular basis?
Lovely.
And she was quiet, and she said, well, yeah, my dad. And he just died 3 months ago.
Oh,
And of course, that opened the heart, the mind. And then she just took the candy and she handed it right back to me. She said, I don't need this anymore.
yeah.
You're doing that exact work and more, getting underneath of what is really, really at the root of the emotional eating, the binge eating. And I have had a chance to read your ebook, your guide. It's a marvelous, marvelous piece of work. And I encourage everyone to get their copies. As you say, there's no obligation. It's free, and it is a valuable resource for anyone who is interested in changing their stress eating patterns or emotional eating patterns and really getting into a healthy, happy frame of mind. So, can you share one more time how listeners and viewers, those watching YouTube and those hearing us in the podcast, how can they get that guide?
Absolutely. So just go to www.joanridsdel, all one word, .com, joanridsdel.com. And a pop-up will appear on my website. Just put your email and your email address and your name, and you'll be able to have it.
Good.
Yeah.
What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they would like to learn more or explore the possibility of working with you? What's the best way to contact you?
So there are a couple of ways. My website as well. So if you go to, again, joanridsdel.com and go to Get in Touch on the top of my website, then you'll be able to book a free discovery call. So I'll be able to connect with you. Or you can email me at coach@joanridsdel.com. And those are probably the two best ways. I'm also on Facebook as well, joan.ridsdel. And you'll be able to reach me there as well if you want to.
Joan, excellent. Is there anything that we've missed that we haven't shared or talked about that you would like to share before we close?
I think the only parting words I have, Steve, are for me to tell people that the change and the transformation that I've gone through with food and my body, I work through with women during my coaching process with them. It's not easy work, particularly if you've been dieting and restricting food and turning to food for emotional support for years or decades. But it is so worthwhile. I say, food freedom and body confidence, and that's absolutely what it is. And so I would encourage you to, if you're at the point where you really want to make some changes, you're exhausted going around that diet roller coaster and the diet cycle and the binge cycle and the emotional eating cycle, just, take some time, have a call with me. It's completely free, no obligations. I love talking about all of this and would love to chat with you. So don't wait. Life's too short. It can change on a dime.
Isn't that the truth? And your
Yes.
own family situation illustrates that point very, very cleanly and clearly. Yes. Joan, thank you so much for sharing so much valuable information, insights, the resource, and I do encourage people who are watching or listening to take advantage of Joan's offer. It's a marvelous, marvelous resource. I've read it, I've looked at it. It just is spot on in what it needs to share, and it shares it in a succinct yet complete way. So, Joan, thank you for joining us, and blessings to you and to those of you watching the video or listening to the audio podcast. Thank you for joining us. Blessings to you and your loved ones. Namaste.